Private members' business, motion re back to school costs. So sin tarishkent module costas a one and le filla skull. And who's moving the motion? I have to done a color.
Moves the motion. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Minister, we are bringing forward this motion as Minister, you'll know that back to school costs are an enormous pressure on families in any year. Just as well, count quarter the clock as well, just so I can keep an eye on the time. Thank you. Minister, back to school costs are a huge burden in any year, and you would often hear organisations such as Bernardo's and St Vincent de Paul and the Irish League of Credit Unions talk about the enormous increased rate of calls that they get, and community welfare officers from families who are really struggling. That is true, that has been true the last few years, but that is doubly true this year. We have a cost of living crisis that sees rents spiralling out of control, childcare costs like a second mortgage, food costs increasing, fuel costs increasing, electricity costs increasing. On top of that, this year you're going to have schools who themselves are under financial pressure passing on some of those costs to families. This week, last week and the week before, the book lists, the uniform lists and the letters for voluntary contributions started coming in. And the scale of this can be quite considerable. Many schools do their best to minimise the costs, but very often, if you have a child in primary school or two children in secondary schools, you could well be paying €1,500. I spoke to one mother in Cork last week, Deputy Doherty, referred to her in Leaders' Questions last week, 1,700 and about €500 or €600 of that in voluntary contributions. That is enough to put any family under very severe pressure. And asking questions about how they're going to pay the next bill, what are they going to be able, are they going to go to the moneylender, are they going to go to the credit union? These are very hard decisions. At a time that summer is supposed to be respite, a break, particularly after the last 2 years, it can be a time of immense hardship. And Minister, I received an email from a woman in Dublin recently, and she said, this time of year is so stressful, worse than I've ever felt. I have an empty fridge, no heat, no car tax because I can't afford the arrears, which keep mounting. I've been on to St Vincent de Paul a few times for help. My eldest is going into transition year. The school asked for additional 100 to the standard registration for fourth year. I have no idea how I'm going to make ends meet when I afford anything this year when can I barely afford to make ends meet. Every 2 weeks my mortgage is paid when my social welfare goes in, leaving me with €50 for the week. And that is the reality for many families, and not just at the very lowest incomes, but right into middle income families and cutting right across the state. So that is the reality that we are contending with, and it has been Sinn Féin's position in recent days and weeks in launching our proposals that this could not wait until September, that this could not wait, that these costs will have come and gone. Now, the government's position until about 2 hours ago was that this had to wait until the budget. I'm sure it is no coincidence or quirk of calendar that the Minister has announced a set of proposals today. Now, I'm glad that the government has started to listen, that the government has realised that it was not possible, that it would not be fair, that it would not be equitable to ask parents to wait until September for assistance when these costs are rising this week, next week and over the coming weeks, and it is going to force people to make very difficult decisions. I want to welcome the fact that the government has taken on several of Sinn Féin's proposals. We have been very keen to ensure that those on the lowest income get additional help. But the problem is, Minister, is that there are still many people who will not benefit from this. And the other part of Sinn Féin's proposals was ensuring that those who currently don't get any assistance would get some. Because, Minister, under your proposal, if you have one child in school and you have a weekly income of €621, you will not qualify for back-to-school allowance. That is not a big income. That is lower than the average industrial wage. So for all those families who are really struggling now, who don't currently qualify, I'm afraid your proposals do not address that, particularly if they don't avail of school transport. So, Minister, what I would say to you this evening is the government has started to listen. At last, they're not saying September any longer. That was an absolutely ludicrous and unfair position in any event. and equally so outside of this particular debate. But, Minister, you need to start listening to those families who don't qualify. They are under very severe pressure. They're going to be making decisions about bills. They're going to be making decisions about money lenders and credit unions and all the rest of it. I am urging you, yes, by all means, implement what you have brought forward today. I welcome it, it will help. But for those families who are looking on and today are wondering, they're watching the news and saying, oh, that might help us, and they're going to find out in a week or two that, no, actually, you're not getting anything. You need to do something about them. Between now and September, Minister, I'm urging you, go back to those talks with Minister McGrath, with Minister Humphreys and the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach and whoever. Find a way to offer assistance to those families. €620 a week and you don't get anything. And you could be facing bills of over €1,000. I'm afraid, Minister, that just isn't good enough. We need more help for them. So I welcome what you have taken on board from the Sinn Féin proposals, but I would ask you, look at the remainder and give some assistance to those who are really struggling, who do not qualify.
Gurmaigad Liascan Corligus Malam and Chakta Donoghue Lira agus Étorjan Runsean Tassi or Son Sinn Féin agus an Oberth Agenta Ega or Shaw Coran Kesha on Tassi La Tomol Fadanish Mortesagan Gold Chiley Munchin fear Vru Lish na Costashi agus Yeta Torte me Lunase agus Poeshi Golara Arash na Scala agus Muradurjan Chakta na Billy Echetimisha na Darsha na Lohinta Shaw. Ja, doubt to be Guro and Lina a bhí gan rialtas na ro ein rod got a harla goji and Ken Ashnish ac Marialler and Runeshaw coru on Tassi and North Chinmage Goal and rialtas ag bogu Kena which is bogu fadagalor. Minister, it's very clear the mantra from government was very clear that we are going to do nothing more, no more individual measures until the budget time. That is the time we were all told where we can comprehensively deal with this issue. But thankfully, Deputy Donoghue Lira has continued to raise this case, and in placing this motion here has forced the Cabinet to act. A scramble of ministers, meeting with the Finance Minister, meeting with the Public Expenditure Minister, to come up with a measure to try and counter what Sinn Féin are asking for. And we welcome any money that will go to families struggling with the cost of living crisis. But let's be clear, this is not enough. There is 500,000 families who have been left out, 500,000 families who earn below €80,000, which should be getting this payment of up to €282 for children 11 years and more.
I'd like to thank Deputy Leary for bringing forward this motion. Sinn Féin are proposing to put in place a significant package of €161 million in cash payments. And I do welcome the measures that have been introduced today, but fundamentally they don't go far enough and they won't deal with the situation facing so many families. So we need to do simple things, give a back-to-school allowance to middle-income families with a household income of under 80,000, extend the back-to-school clothing, footwear, increase back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance by 50%, work towards abolishing voluntary contributions. And last year, I challenged the school that wouldn't allow the processing of an application form for children in that school unless they paid a €100 deposit, which they would get back into the future. And I just think that's wrong. That's putting pressure on parents at a very early stage. As a parent of 4 children who have gone through school, and 3 of them gone through college, and the youngest one is looking forward to going to college in October, I know what it's like for many parents who's trying to deal with the costs of children going to school. Those back-to-school costs are enormous. Enormous issue every year as parents have to pay hundreds and often thousands on books, uniforms, as I said, those so-called voluntary contributions, and so many other things, because it continues not just in September, October, it goes right throughout until the following summer, and I think that needs to be dealt with as well. I'd just like to mention a thing today. The Taoiseach cast out on the NGO's data in relation to cost of children returning to school, and I'd like him to withdraw that slur on the professionalism of these groups, and I'm sure he won't be found wanting when it comes to cutting a ribbon or taking a photo opportunity from those departments. And I think it's important that he does retract that statement that he made today. One of those groups, Bernardo's, found in a survey in 2021, 50% of parents said they were concerned about the costs of return to school, and 20% of parents take out some form of loan to pay for school costs. That's absolutely outrageous. A parent fearing the costs or unable to pay the costs, having to take out a loan. So I'm asking this government You have moved, and it's very, very welcome, and there'll be a lot of people who will be, happy that you have moved. But I think there's a whole section of people there, those working people, working families, who will get absolutely nothing, who will also struggle, who are the ones who are also going to the credit union or going to the banks to try and get money to send their children to school or to college, and I think that needs to be addressed. Guramagat.
Deputy Rose Conway-Wall.
Minister, I'm glad that you have listened to my colleague Donncha O'Leary on this, and it's very clear. I mean, even Taoiseach said this morning that this went the last few days. Well, the last few days, and I welcome what it has brought. And I think it's an example of effective opposition. I only wish the government would listen more to what the opposition has to say and what we have to say in terms of alleviating the pressures on family. The families in Mayo are finding that back-to-school costs are a struggle. They're a struggle every year, but this year it's pushing so many people over the edge. And already coming through the door are books lists, uniform lists and the letters and the voluntary contributions. And Minister, can you imagine what it's like to be the child in the classroom who cannot go on the school tour, who cannot afford being asked for voluntary contributions, and the money just is not there? It is not there, even though the household and the family may be turning the heating off and maybe reducing the amount of food that they're eating. The money is just not there, the money that's demanded from them. And I want you to understand and to realise the damage that's done to children when they're forced into that situation. So I welcome what has been done by yourselves so far today. You have done it under duress and under pressure, but the duress and the pressure that families are under is so immense in trying to get an education for their children. We have to remember that within the Constitution, we're supposed to provide free education, and that's what we have to get back to. This motion is an opportunity to give the back-to-school allowance to middle-income families, targeting those in household incomes of 80,000 or less. Because there are so many people who are locked out, and so many families who are locked out of the situation of being able to benefit from the back-to-school allowance. It is not reflecting the financial reality for people within their households. And that's why in the motion it would mean that 500,000 additional children would qualify. It's crucially important that those families qualify as well, and that those families are given a break. They're the families that work really hard, that work tirelessly to try and educate their children. The proposal would also see a 50% increase for those receiving payment already. I welcome, Minister, the announcements that we made on the school transport, but that does need to be more than just this year. It is scandalous the way that we have charged €650 to families to get on a school bus and denied many, many children across this state a seat on the school bus because we label them as concessionary. It is not right.
Current fáilte rih an rún seo an ochta agus gan buchas le chóglaí Donncha O'Leary as an rún seo a chur os Cornadála a nocht. Mar nui ara tás an fad an bhrú úsach atá ar Charlie fí láthair. Tá brú orthú marall ar an gosas marachtála ach tá brú eile orthú inis marall Gwyl is acab go mé mean fóver ag teach go lua tá litrichaí teacht is seas sa dúras acab agus tá siad ag lorg airgid hanahéin agus níl an tarigid sin ag daoine. Now ar tamsásta agus feiceam méid a bhógriú a nocht groisih ag éisteacht linn agus dócha nach roisih ag éisteacht ag geart linn. Mar churann fáilte leis an méid atá ráitinne ach ní leor é. Tá san go bhfuil go leor daoine atá díreach Timo Gumwanda, nach mai anan cower agus cúna a all gor mian fóver. Tá an dína €650 in aine seachtainna le páiste bháin nach bhuiisi sin tada. O méidetá chur os Cornadála an anocht, bhach 500,000 páiste eile ag fáil cower. Cínte sin go macht 75 fin géid de páistí scola ag fáil cúna is ag fáil cower agus sin é an cinál action atá tasa wen ón rialtas seo. Go digach an rialtas, go dasaíonn an cower sin, agus is mór an trúa é a ara nar déisih linn a gceart. A ara, I'm delighted that we are having this debate. And look, Minister, I am pleased that there has been an announcement tonight, after months of hearing and weeks, over the last few weeks of hearing, that no action will be taken until the budget. It is welcome that some action has been taken. But the problem is, And look, Minister, it was clear that you did listen to the proposals put forward by my colleague Donogh O'Leary. But the problem is that you didn't listen to it fully. The problem is that there is a whole section of people that are left behind. In our proposals, it would mean that 500,000 extra children would be included. That would mean that 75% of school-going children would get that support. That is the kind of action that is needed from government. That is the kind of support that Galway families need now. And Minister, I would ask you to reflect on that, and I would ask you to bring in the measures that Sinn Féin are proposing this evening.
I would like to thank my colleague Donogh O'Leary, spokesperson for education for Sinn Féin, and his team for putting this sensible and beneficial package together for the good of our school children and the nation. The facts here speak for themselves. We have a record high inflation rate, over 9%, and raging towards breaking the 10% barrier. We have heavy food prices heading our way too. A local bakery in Wexford that supplies the region has increased their prices 3 times in the last 18 months. It is now €3.19 for a white sliced pan from the local bakery, and this is a basic food item. Flour has doubled in price, vegetable oil has tripled, and yeast has increased by 30%. There's also been huge increases in milk, eggs and buttermilk. 12 months ago, pasteurised egg cost €1.20 per kilo. Today it costs €2.40 per kilo. Butter is trading at €7,500 per tonne. 12 months ago, it was €3,380 per tonne. I raise these issues because they affect every single family in Ireland and are subsequently related to every family's school budget. Something must be done now to help families, particularly with the back-to-school costs. The basics must be covered. Families on middle incomes, and including families on incomes up to 80,000 and less, must be included in the family back-to-school allowance. Everyone in this House, including government and opposition deputies, must take action now. Working families are facing colossal energy bills this winter. Electricity bills and gas bills have commercially increased by 193% and 93% respectively, and unfortunately more to come. Why is this motion so important? Because it would give an additional 500,000 children and their parents financial help at a time when critical intervention is most needed. It will help to hold back the tide and keep working families above the waterline. We are asking the government to increase the back-to-school allowance by 50% for those who already qualify for it. We were also asking the government to enact Sinn Féin's Affordable School Uniforms Bill. This realisation must sink in. Immediate action must be forthcoming before the winter arrives. The increase in back-to-school allowance can and will make a difference to over 2/3 of children returning to school and those who are enrolling for the first time this year. An increase of €160 to €140 for parents and children between 4 and 11, and from €285 to €427.50 for children up to 12 years of age. This package will make a huge difference and will help many families, including an additional 500,000 children and their families, to help towards their back-to-school costs at a time they need it most. I would ask all deputies to see the economic and social benefit this motion will bring to our future young people and their parents, and that you gave help when it was really needed. I hope you all will support this motion tonight. For 10 weeks' time, it's far too late.
So I welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion regarding cutting back-to-school costs and commend my colleague Donogh O'Leary for his work in bringing it forward. Families across the state, and I've spoken with many in my own constituency of Cavan Monaghan, find back-to-school costs a huge burden every year. However, this year it is more severe with the cost of living crisis, which is seeing continually spiraling fuel and food costs, also high rents and childcare costs to contend with. Letters for the purchase of books and uniforms and voluntary contributions have started to arrive through the doors already. So I do welcome the initiatives that you have already announced, the increase in the back-to-school allowance, but I do agree with my colleagues that it needs to be extended to squeezed middle-income families, targeting those on a household income of 80,000 or less. This measure would ensure an additional 500,000 children will qualify for this support and greatly ease the enormous pressure on their parents. This is the squeezed middle who don't qualify for anything. They're just above the threshold for the medical card, above the threshold for housing support, above the threshold for the back-to-school allowance. This year they really need a break. Also, something needs to be done about the cost of school books. Sinn Féin and government would work towards an entirely free school book scheme for children. So while some schools have book rental arrangements and they do reduce costs considerably, we need to go further and ensure children have access to free school books. And as a former teacher, I also believe that something needs to be done about the excessive number of times school book publishers revise their textbooks, forcing families to purchase books every few years. It's entirely unnecessary. I also believe in school transport. Again, I welcome the fact that fees have been dismissed for this year. But I believe, again, it should go further. We need to eliminate fees in the school transport system on a phased basis and provide seats for an additional 10,000 children. Other countries offer free school transport. Why can't we? Sinn Féin government would enact Sinn Féin's Affordable School Uniforms Bill straight away, alongside our bill to abolish voluntary contributions, which can put families under pressure to fork out hundreds of euros every year. Schools need to be properly resourced so they're not relying on these voluntary contributions. So on the motion here today, I once again commend my colleague Deputy O'Leary and reiterate that families are suffering here and now. They need assistance immediately.
Louise O'Reilly.
Count Corla. Minister, I want to thank my colleague Teachta Donncha O'Leary for all of his work in this area. And I want to thank him principally for listening to parents who are really worried about not being able to cope with their kids going back to school. And these are genuine worries that parents have. And as September comes, they start to worry a little bit more. And Teachta O'Leary has done more than just listen. He has taken from those parents what it is that they desperately need. He has put it into a comprehensive package, and we're laying it before the House tonight on behalf of those parents who are struggling. Now, I do want to welcome the U-turn by government, because as we know, you said you wouldn't be doing anything, but wait till October. Now the budget's in September and we have some additional measures. And I suppose if this was a school report, we'd be saying could try harder or indeed could listen a little bit better. In my own constituency of Dublin Fingal, we pay some of the highest rents in Europe. Back to school costs, they're not a nuisance for my constituents. They are an absolute matter of being able to get to the end of the week or not. Most of the people cannot afford the rents that we have to pay unless they have a second income. So you have both parents working, paying some of the highest childcare rates in Europe, the highest rents in Europe. The cost of everything is going up. Now, we welcome the measures, but Minister, it's been outlined to you already that 500,000 kids are going to miss out. So all we're asking is that you listen to what we are saying, listen to what the parents are saying, listen to their lived reality and their experience of the cost of living crisis. Take all of that into account and revise your proposals so that they will actually make a meaningful difference to the lives of low and middle income earners who are struggling. And Minister, I want to just draw attention to what you said in your contribution. Where voluntary contributions are sought from parents, it must be made clear to all families that the contributions are voluntary in nature. Do you have any idea what sort of pressure is put on parents to pay that voluntary contribution? Would you like to be the only child in the class who wasn't paying it? Would you like to be the only one? Because kids know. And you know that, Minister. Kids know these contributions are far from voluntary, and it mortifies teachers and principals to have to ask for it. But they're making up a shortfall left by the government. So please, Minister, live in the real world. These contributions are in no way voluntary. They put pressure on parents.
I'm very pleased to speak on this PMB tonight, given the back-to-school pressure on my constituents in North Kildare. I'm also very pleased that the government has seen some sense and responded to Teachta O'Leary's lead on addressing the back-to-school costs before the Dáil recess. What we're discussing is essential because I have hard-working mothers coming to me and saying that they feel sick in the pit of their stomachs when they're out trying to manage the grocery shopping bill and they can see the school uniforms back in the schools already. They're shifting around the school book lists or along the counter, hoping that they'll be able to make a start of them soon and they won't have to leave it until the end of August. And our plans in the so-called voluntary contribution would bring peace of mind to hard-working families. So I'd like you to look at that, Minister, because they're not really voluntary contributions. Families have their children, they dread their children coming home from school with that, reminding letter or having them excluded from school activities. All this in a country that prides itself on free education. Low to middle income families are drowning in the cost of living crisis. What we are proposing in our PMB would throw them a lifeline and give them a hand, because life is hard behind a lot of doors, and a lot more doors as well currently, some of the doors that you mightn't even imagine. Our carefully costed plan would immediately put money in people's pockets, take away the mortification that comes when that dreaded letter comes about the voluntary contribution, and give financial breathing space back to families suffering financial stress and worry. We would have extended the back-to-school allowance at current rates to an additional 500,000 children, middle-income families. We proposed increasing the payment by €80 from €160 to €240 for a child 4 to 11, and from €285 to €427.50, an increase of €142 for children in the plus 12 range, and where you're giving a flat €100. Now, Sinn Féin, we believe that we should be targeting the increases to families where they really need it. And we all know that back-to-school costs are much more expensive for children going back to secondary school rather than primary school. The uniforms, the books, everything. Our move to a free book scheme also would be like manna from heaven for so many parents, as would the extra 10,000 places on the bus in Esculla. And I would say that we need vastly more places on the bus in Esculla if we are to show that we're really taking climate change seriously. I'm surprised that the Green Party didn't seem to have any input into what the 11th hour action that came today. But I welcome that you're following Sinn Féin's lead here and that you have moved, but I do think you need to move further, Minister.
Desi Ellis, you seem to have the remaining time.
Around Carlock. With the summer holidays underway, it won't be long before most parents around the country will begin to think about the costs of sending their children back to school. For many parents, particularly in this economic climate, the thought of finding the means to pay the escalating costs of preparing a child or a number of children for the new school year can be a daunting prospect. Most parents preparing a child for the new school year will have a must-buy list of items. This could include uniforms, school shoes and books for the new academic year. There will also be an expectation that they will have to make voluntary contributions to the school and to provide for the cost of various school activities in the new academic year. Many schools will insist that parents buy branded uniforms such as blazers, school shorts and ties from a specific supplier, which can be very costly. For those in economically disadvantaged communities or parents on low incomes, they often face stark choices when preparing their child or children to return to school, and can impact on the family's health and welfare, on their ability to pay bills, to pay rent, pay mortgages, pay for transport or pay for childcare. At an average cost of €1,200 for a primary school student and €1,500 for a secondary school student. Most families struggle to find the extra money to cover such back-to-school costs. With the cost of living spiralling out of control, these costs are an additional burden on struggling families. Sinn Féin is proposing to help struggling families by extending the back-to-school allowance to middle-income families with a household income of under $80,000. This would bring an additional 500,000 children into the back-to-school allowance scheme. For those who already qualify for the allowance, it is essential that they receive an increase in the allowance by 50% to allow for the escalating rising costs across the board of sending a child back to school. We need to catch up with our neighbours in the north and introduce a free school book scheme. Sending a child to school should not impose a financial burden on parents. Whatever happened to the idea of free education? That is something we should be striving for. The government needs to take urgent action to ensure that sending a child to school is not going to break the bank or cause hardship for the parents or the child. While some of the measures that the Minister has announced are welcome, it has taken a long time, and this PMB has pushed them into this position. Thank you.
Firstly, I just want to thank Donald Collier for bringing this extremely important motion forward. Back to school costs yearly exposes shamefully the deep divide that exists in a society when it comes to rich and poor. What sickens me to the stomach is that this time of the year, thinking of children that are all too aware of what their parents are actually facing, what they're struggling into, and they can do little about it, only suffer anxiety, fear, and even in many cases embarrassment. The measures that were brought here today and proposed by Sinn Féin in this motion increase the back-to-school clothing and the footwear allowance, extending this allowance to middle-income earners, rolling out the full and free school book scheme, allowing universal affordable school uniforms and reducing school transport fees are all measures that are desperately needed. And what I want to say on that is I am glad, that the government actually have woken up, to the reality of what back-to-school actually costs. And I would say, Minister, by all means, and I do welcome some of the proposals that you have, maybe haven't gone far enough, but I would certainly say implement them as soon as possible. But I'm glad to see that the government have responded to the pressure from this side of the House. But I've listened to a number of debates on this, and the one that kicks me really hard, because I've even been on an email here on it, is the voluntary contributions. And in your opening statement you said no charge may be made. May is very weak. No charge will be made. It does cause a lot of hassle on it. And why I say this is, it's probably the most cruelest thing, this charge on parents and children. They can't hide from it, anytime. And I mean, in fairness, we've all heard the stories about, kids not getting lockers because money's been held back. I suspect that's going to happen unless we strengthen it. I would also make an appeal, Minister, to everybody within the education sector, I suppose in this year of all years, to just be extra sensitive. People are struggling here, families, kids, it hits everybody. But the big worry I have here is the fact that, the impact on vulnerable children and their families is, psychologically could be scarred. And as I said, look, many times we don't get on very well with either side of this, but I mean, we can come to agreement on this. And I do want to again commend Deputy O'Leary for this and the amount of work that's gone into it. These are not ideas, these are actually solutions, and hopefully we'll have one of the best education sectors in this country in a number of years.
Thanks, Deputy Carty.
Here, look, I too want to commend Deputy O'Leary for not only this motion but for forcing government to a point where, despite their protestations, they were unable to hide from the fact that measures needed to be introduced to support families with the costs of sending their children back to school. And I do welcome the measures that were announced today. I particularly welcome the announcement of free school transport. I hope that it will become a permanent measure, and I hope that the school transport scheme will be expanded so that we can get rid of the ludicrous situation whereby school buses in my constituency are actually passing children who have to get in their family car in order to get to school because they don't qualify for the arbitrary criteria that's set down. But in relation to the financial packages that have been announced, Minister, I want to put in the record of the Dáil a letter, or extracts from a letter I actually received this morning. This letter says, I'm a 30-year-old full-time working mother of 3 and have worked from I was 16. I got married at 24, I've never been on benefits. In 2020 we bought our home, and in December 2021 I had my 3rd child. I had to return to work in March of this year, 3 months after having that baby, as the €250 a week payment was not enough to keep food in my children's mouth and a roof over their head. My husband also works full-time, but due to the increase in costing, it was just not possible for me to stay at home any longer. The government have added an extra 2 weeks for parental leave, which is wonderful, but what about the mothers that can't even take the 6 months maternity leave off because of affordability issues? In September, I will have 2 children attending school, and recently I went to apply for the back-to-school allowance. I didn't even get past the first stage because the question was, which of the following payments are you receiving? As I said previously, none, so therefore I'm not entitled. I cannot afford the €1,000 on school supplies. I also have childcare to pay, and again I'm not entitled to any subsidies. This is an unfair situation. Minister, I have no option but to write back to that mother and tell her that nothing has been provided today by government for her particular situation, because you haven't extended the eligibility criteria for the back to school, and no other measures, according to minister after minister, are going to be in place until the end of September, a month after her children go back to school. I want to put on the record again my appeal to government to introduce an emergency budget that will actually provide supports for families such as this mother and her family.
Thanks, Deputy O'Leary, to conclude the debate.
Cormagat agus bon buchas a goil a gach teachta Glockport sa G-Sport agus gach in our hockey glishin room is over fear talklach isho agus tigamid galéir goil galortish mahori agus taila go veg fui brew mealtina sna snachtani biogatála teacht go meg an níor ar fain siad na litricha ag géirí for Iontasi ag géirí na listí lawer na listí Closcoda agus Natálie eile a bhaineann leis sin ní len doubt ach gur géir céim é seo gach bliain ach go háir is a bblion seo leis an géir céim costas martála ag gaiir níos measa agus gan poin gníomh ó heh cías gan istóca le costasaí cuaram leanaí a fós i gcónaí na costasaí ó heh bia ó heh brosla ó heh letrachas ag fós i gcónaí agus is cóhéic sin atá míid tá anna imníar an go méid an géir céim ó heh costasaí fillar scola níos measa ná riamh. I want to thank all the deputies who took part in the debate and who supported the motion. I would urge the government to support the motion because I believe what it contains is the potential to build on what the government have brought forward, and I very much concur with what Deputy Barry said earlier. I think this government would have shut up shop, would have gone to recess without any proposals to assist with back to school, only for the fact that there was pressure coming on from the Sinn Féin motion and our proposals, but from other organisations as well. I welcome the steps that have been taken. It will help. It will help those on the lowest incomes, undoubtedly. But, Minister, there are many, many people who will not benefit. And as I said earlier, there will be people who will watch the news tonight and they will say, well, that's good, and I wonder what I will get out of that. And they could be on quite low incomes, and they could be struggling, and they're not going to benefit. If you have a combined household income of over €620 and one child in school, you will not qualify. That's about €32,000 a year, I think. That is not a big income. That is very far from a big income. That is exactly the kind of people who are trying to decide whether they can afford to go ahead with their holidays, whether they can afford the electricity bills that are coming down the line, whether they're going to have to go to the credit union, whether they're going to have to go to a money lender. These are all the decisions that families are going to have to make. And for those people there now that are hoping that they're going to benefit from this, it's not the case, unfortunately. Now, it doesn't require legislation, Minister, to extend payments such as this. So, I welcome what's come forward today, and I urge you to implement it as soon as possible. I also want to acknowledge, I suppose, the area of free school meals, which is something we would have included in pre-budget submissions. We want to get to a place eventually where every child gets a hot meal in school. That's going to take time, but we need to start with JES students, and that's what we have advocated for a number of years. But in terms of assistance to what we had looked for, that the broad, I suppose, low and middle income earners, not to benefit those on the very highest incomes who are in a position, but those who have a combined household income of 80,000 or less, that they would be in a position to benefit, that they would get some assistance, because a lot of them are under very severe pressure as well. And I would urge you to go forth from here, yes, implement what you have brought forward today. There's none of that we disagree with, but build upon it. You don't need to pass legislation. You can, over the course of next week or two, sit down with Minister Humphrey, sit down with Minister McGrath, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, Minister Ryan, whoever else, and agree a formula to extend back to education allowance to those who don't qualify. Because they need assistance, and they're going to be, just because they fall above that threshold, that doesn't mean that they're not going to be ringing St Vincent de Paul or organisations like that. That doesn't mean that at all. So, I would urge you, and even, look, we've outlined a particular proposal. Even if you don't go as far as what we've outlined, do something for those people. Please invest some time to build on what has happened today and ensure that people who have missed out today can stand to benefit some amount, because otherwise they're going to be under severe pressure. And Minister, we are still going to be talking about this over the course of the summer months unless those people get some assistance. And I'm not just talking about Sinn Féin, I'm talking about society as a whole. Those families will be ringing your constituency office and Minister Madigan's constituency office and my office and Deputy Carty and Buckley's office. All of us will still be getting phone calls unless something is done to assist those people. So that door is not closed. It should not be closed. I would urge you, support our motion, first of all, that's calling for these proposals, but consider what we have brought forward as a proposal, and please implement something that goes some way to assist those people.
Thanks, David. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Agreed? Minister, is it? That was, okay, so it's agreed, so.